Welcome to Torah Today Ministries. My name is Grant Luton.
And I'm Robin, and this is Breadcrumbs, where we hope to provide a little soul food today.
Yeah, just a few crumbs of soul
At least
food.
a few
if
crumbs,
nothing
right?
else. Yes. Yeah, what we're going to discuss today is something that I had planned to do a teaching on for my Hebrew Key series. But as Robin and I kept talking about this, we decided it suited itself a lot better to a breadcrumbs episode.
Well, we'll find out.
We'll find out if we're right or not.
We're kind of excited to see what we're going to say.
Yes.
So we don't know.
Yeah. So, but anyways, the title of this breadcrumbs episode is The Power of Questions.
Can I begin with a question?
Start with a question, Robin.
I have a question about questions. Why is asking questions so important and powerful?
Because without questions, doors stay closed. In fact, doors could even stay undiscovered. And questions are valued so highly in Hebraic thought. And the rabbis over the years have talked about questions are so valuable. And that one quote here is, you can tell whether a man is clever by his answers. You can tell whether he is wise by his questions.
Well, I hope that we can explore this, Grant, and talk about why questions can open doors that we need to walk through. But not all questions are honest and healthy.
Yes.
So my pursuit here, as we discuss this, is to draw a distinction between the healthy questions and the unhealthy questions.
Right.
Let's start with...
Well, before we even do that,
Okay.
Something we need to understand is this. Questions are powerful.
Right.
They are powerful. They're like fire. Is fire good or is fire bad?
Yes.
Well, how is the fire used?
So
Questions can
interesting.
be good or they can be bad.
Well, you mentioned wisdom a minute ago in that quote.
Yes.
I am intrigued by what the word wisdom tells us about questions.
They're built into the word for wisdom. The Hebrew word is chokhmah. It's 4 letters in Hebrew. The first 2 letters, chokh, are the word that means power. The last 2 letters spell the word ma, which means what? So chokhmah, wisdom, is the power of what? In other words, the power of asking a question. And you know, and Yeshua himself, he said that if we ask and it'll be given to you, okay, so we're making a request for something. Seek and you will find. So there's something we need that we're looking for. We follow God to find it. But then he says, knock, it'll be open to you. And I remember how puzzling that third part always was. And in Bible studies, when I was a teenager, we talk about what is the knocking we do? I know he knocks on the door of our heart, but what do we knock on? Well, when I began to read the rabbis, knocking means you're trying to open a door. And that is done by asking the right questions. That's how we knock.
Well, what about the verse that talks about Yeshua himself knocking? And it's up to us to open the door.
Yes. He's not there to ask a question. He's there to gain entrance.
Right.
But so many times we cannot go very far in our souls unless we are asking the right questions.
And I think that you and I have been especially interested in this subject because we weren't really raised with the idea of this kind of existential curiosity and pursuit. We were kind of raised in an environment that tells you once you have found it, there used to be bumper stickers, I found it.
Yes.
And that it was all wrapped up in a tidy way. And there was nothing more to know. You just wanted to spend the rest of your life finding affirmation for what you've decided is the complete truth for life and the afterlife. And it didn't take long for both of us to realize something's wrong here. That's the beginning of the journey, certainly not the end.
Absolutely. Yeah, a question is powerful, because it's going to lead us someplace that we may not want to go. Now, if we're asking questions only to confirm what we already believe, we're no student of truth. But if we ask good questions, willing to follow the answer wherever it takes us, then we're a disciple of Messiah. And Yeshua was always asking questions because that would open doors. But you have to have courage to follow through. Now, you mentioned some minute ago how questions can be dangerous. Well, the first words out of Satan's mouth, out of the serpent's mouth, were a question. And it was a question, did God really say? And that question was there to raise doubt. It wasn't to get at truth. It was actually to diminish Eve's and Adam's faith. And it was a very dangerous question.
Well, I imagine that question actually entering Eve's mind to where she thought it was her own voice asking that question. And it's the same question that the enemy wants us to ask, which isn't healthy and safe. When you know he has spoken truth and you say, did he really say that?
Yeah.
Or is that really true?
Right.
I think ego is the key to whether or not a question is going to lead us into a bigger world or to shrink our world into a smaller place.
Yeah. Some people say they're on a search. They're asking questions because they're on a search. But when you pay attention to who they're asking the questions of, it's pretty obvious they've already decided what direction they want to go. And they're just looking for people who will confirm what they want to hear. And that's not honest. That's not humble. That's the ego at work. But to have a truly honest question of God, because we want to know him better, we want to live lives that are more effective, we have to have the courage and the joy to follow the answer wherever it takes us. Because here's the thing. A question will always lead to death of something.
How do you mean that?
Lead to death. Well, the Hebrew word for to ask a question, is the word sha'al. And in fact, we have two sha'als, major characters in the Bible, and that's King Sha'al, King Saul, and Rabbi Sha'al, and their names mean to ask. And when you look at Paul's first words, Rabbi Apostle Saul, his first words are, "Who are you, Lord?"
And that was a very important question.
Very important question. But here's another thing. When you take that word Sha'al and we pronounce it Shaul, Saul, we can also pronounce that word
Sheol.
without changing a single bit of the spelling. It becomes Sheol, which is the grave. Here's what's going on. When the serpent asked Adam and Eve that question, did God really say? He Sha'aled something, and it led to Sheol because they gave the wrong answer, and they sought what they wanted instead of what God wanted. They knew the correct answer, but they twisted the question around in such a way that they provided their own answer contrary to God's. And whenever you ask a question, here's the power of it. If I follow that answer, something's going to have to go. First of all, my ignorance will have to go, and that's a good thing. But then the way I've been living may have to change. I may have to bury the way I've been doing things. Or I know in my case, I was raised in a Baptist church, and when I turned about 18, 19 years old, I started asking questions that made people very uncomfortable. And eventually, I had to leave there. I went to another place for many years, wonderful place. But I began to ask questions, and those questions led me to another place. So something had to die for something else to come alive. Something had to go in the grave so that something else could be birthed. And this is why courage is necessary to embrace the answers we may receive to our questions. But one thing I can guarantee, if questions are asked in humility and with a real search for truth, it'll lead us to truth, and the answers will be good.
I think that one of the problems, Grant, in the world today, when it comes to the matter of faith, religion, all of that, is that we crave certainty.
Yes.
And certainty gives us this sort of false security because certainty isn't something that we can really have.
Right.
We can have clarity. We can have enlightenment.
Right.
One of my favorite quotes by Rabbi Jonathan Sacks is, "Faith isn't certainty. It is the courage to live with uncertainty It is not knowing all the answers. It is often the strength to live with the questions.
Yes.
Which sounds like we're contradicting ourselves, because Yeshua says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And if you come to me, you will have life. You will have the truth. But we misunderstand that to think that we can just kind of accept a dogma and there are no more questions to be asked. I've come to realize, as a book I'm reading, Yearnings, states, when you've got the answer in your own mind, it's time to find better questions.
Yes. Well, like William Paul Young, I'm not sure who he was, but I wrote this quote down because I love it. Choose your question carefully. One good question is worth 1,000 answers.
And the truth does set us free.
It does.
But only if we're always in the process of pursuing it and discovering, because the truth is so big and eternal. It's eternal.
Yes. Well, the word truth in Hebrew is emet, and it's spelled using the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, the middle letter, and the final letter of the alphabet. The first, middle, and last letter, Aleph, Mem, and Tav, because truth covers everything. Mm-hmm. And here's the thing about a good question. When you're a child, you might ask your parents a question about where do babies come from, or why is the sky blue? And they'll give you an answer that's true, but it's limited because your understanding and your language and intelligence is limited at that point. But later, that same question can be asked, and you get a better answer because you're ready for a fuller answer.
Right.
And then later yet,
our capacity
changes
expands
for more of an answer to the same question.
Only if we're continuing to grow does our
Right.
capacity increase.
Yes.
So if we're growing, then we're continuing to ask perhaps similar questions,
Yes.
but in a new and more mature way, right?
Well, it reminds me of a story. I've told it before in other teachings, but it's worth repeating. It's a true story about a young man of a couple hundred years ago, wanted to go and study under a particular rabbi in one city. And so finally, situation was arranged where he could go to this other city, go to the yeshiva where this rabbi taught. And he was so excited to get there. So on the first day, he's there with all these other students. They're sitting at the feet of the rabbi, and he asks a question. And all the students sit there and just contemplate and think for a while. Well, the new kid, he thought, well, I know the answer to that. And he raises his hand and he spouts off the answer. And the rabbi reached out and slapped him across the face.
That's harsh.
And the kid's embarrassed and confused. So after the class, he asked one of the other students, he said, why did the rabbi slap me across the face? And the young man said, you'll learn to never ruin a good question with an answer. In other words, just because you have an answer, don't stop asking the question. Continue pondering the question. If the rabbi is asking the question, keep thinking about it. Use that question like a shovel to dig deeper and deeper and deeper into the truth.
Well, that's one of the reasons you and I years ago became intrigued and attracted to Jewish wisdom.
Yes.
And began to study the Torah, and it has expanded our context for understanding the truth, because Jewish wisdom encourages us to be healthy skeptics.
Right.
And I think both of us felt welcome into that world where we had both experienced being slapped down for asking honest questions.
Oh, yes.
One of the things we've both noticed through the years as people start to dig and explore the Torah of God, the bigger context, those books of the Bible that are foundational, and that becomes our cornerstone for understanding all the rest of the Word, is almost to the last person we've heard over and over. The more I learn, the more I realize I don't know.
That's for sure.
And then we know that a student is being born.
Yes.
And I've often wondered, well, how do I not just live a life of total frustration, because there's always more to learn and you can almost feel so overwhelmed you give up. And then I heard this beautiful truth years ago that just made me smile and kind of sigh with a peaceful resignation, and it's this: when the student is ready, the teacher will come.
Say that one more time.
When the student is ready, the teacher will come. In other words, he leads us into the truth that we're ready for in the next step,
Yes.
if we're hungry to know it.
Right.
He'll lead us to a person, he'll lead us to a book, he'll lead us to his spirit
Yes.
speaking deep into our soul. But if we're honestly and humbly asking him to answer an important question, he delights in that.
Absolutely.
And he will answer it. We don't have to frantically be in this frenzied state of pursuit and frustration.
Yeah. Well, of course, this is why the Father says, "Come, let us reason together."
And it's a life of peaceful learning,
Absolutely.
knowing that each step is going to lead us to the next step.
Yeah.
And it's a journey of discovery and real delight, as opposed to just almost feeling like you have to compete with people who disagree with you. I left that world years ago, and I can never return.
That's right. Yeah, that's, I'm going to embarrass Robin a little bit here.
Don't.
But I am. I've known Robin since she was 7 years old. I was a few years older. But one of the things I noticed that made you so unique, Robin, was because you asked persistent questions and you were never satisfied with a surface answer. And you've been that way ever since.
Well, it's not always a virtue that wins friends. But I've always been so curious and wanting to know, and I do crave clarity. But years ago, I realized I had to give up certainty and live a life of faith, and God has just satisfied those desires of my heart. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking at another quote here. We have some really good quotes today. This is by Sue Monk Kidd.
Oh, I love her books.
Did you read that? You didn't just quote that one, did you?
No.
Okay.
Go ahead.
It says, people who want life hammered down into tight legalistic certainties seem to me to be the people most insecure inside. Frankly, the folks who frighten me the most are those who are dead certain about everything, who have all the answers and no questions.
Oh, my goodness.
Isn't that the truth?
One of the things that I wanted to kind of think through before we had this conversation publicly is I had a question about how you know if a question is a good question. And I remember as we read through the apostolic writings, people are hammering Yeshua with questions. Sometimes they're questions where they're seeking true answers, but other times, all too often, they're questions because they want to entrap him and prove what they think is right. And it's so important because I've been in groups where people are asking curious, helpful, amazing questions, and that just opens up a conversation for learning. But I've also been in a gathering where somebody is a skeptic and they're angry and they're resentful. And they'll ask a question not because they want to know, but because they want to kind of halt a conversation if it isn't going their way. So this leads me to a quote I love by Rachel Held Evans. Are you ready?
Yes.
Because this is the distinction between a good question and a bad one. Doubt is a difficult animal to master because it requires that we learn the difference between doubting God and doubting what we believe about God.
And that's a huge difference.
That's the distinction, Grant. Are we doubting God or are we doubting what we believe about God?
Right.
And then it goes on. The former, or doubting God, has the potential to destroy faith. The latter has the power to enrich and refine it. The former is a vice, the latter a virtue. I would argue that healthy doubt or questioning one's beliefs is perhaps the best defense against unhealthy doubt or questioning God.
Yes. That's a huge difference because one is I'm questioning myself.
Right.
The other, I'm questioning God, his faithfulness.
Or returning to that original sin. Did God really say?
Yes, right. We hear a lot in the Christian community these days about deconstruction, about people who are going back and they're questioning what they believe about God, what they've been taught about God.
And that's essential.
And that's important. And and if you're a parent of a teenager and they're starting to question their faith, Don't panic.
As we did.
As we did. Don't panic.
Right.
You should rejoice and begin to pray and thank God, first of all, that they are asking questions, and then pray that they will continue to ask those questions humbly and truly to find the truth. Because what they're doing is they are now taking ownership of their faith. As someone once said, God has children, but he has no grandchildren.
And I think if your kids see that you're not threatened by their honest
Yes.
questions, then you can say, you know what, let's figure this out together.
Say, that's a great question. And you can point them in some directions, but let them figure things out. Because so much of the deconstruction is not deconstructing, it's just destruction, not deconstruction.
Because there's no reconstruction.
Yes. So deconstruct means you carefully take things apart. I remember doing this many years ago. I questioned everything I'd been taught. I knew God was real. I didn't question that. But I questioned everything I'd been taught about him. So I took everything apart piece by piece, examined it, and then I either put it back in or it went in the scrap heap. And I've had to do that a few times since, but that first time was thrilling, it was terrifying, but probably the most important thing I ever did in my life. And we have to take ownership of our faith.
Well, my skepticism went so far as to wonder if God really was real.
Yes, I remember
And that scared me.
Yeah.
And then I remember just realizing that if he is, and I wanted to think he was, but I didn't want to just conform to a belief system and play if he really isn't. And I finally relaxed into that eternal truth that if it's true, he'll show me it's true.
Absolutely.
And things began to open up, Grant. And that's when I just saw
Knock and it will be open.
Yes. And he really welcomed that. And then I remember having this sense of like shaking that Etch-a-Sketch when I was a kid and erasing all the lines I had drawn and starting over and letting him fill it in.
Yes.
And it has just, and it still continues.
Yeah. We still ask questions, not questions where we're doubting God. We're doubting our understanding of him, and we're just wanting to know him better.
He says, if you seek me with your whole heart, you'll find me.
So again, questions are dangerous, and you must have courage and joy, and it goes without saying, humility to accept the answers you come to. And but they will lead you on a journey. But remember, Sha'al, to ask, is the foundation of the word Sheol, grave. Sheol doesn't mean hell, it means the grave. There'll be some things will have to go and have to be buried away to make room for new things and for life and for living things.
Well, last night we had the pleasure of a good friend coming because she called and said, do you have time for me to ask a few questions? Yeah. And we said, absolutely, let's do it. So we sat around for the whole evening and one question led to another question, led to another question. Yeah. And at the end, she said, I'm so grateful for taking up this time. And I said, you don't understand. This is like the most fun thing ever for us. And what we've learned, Grant, along the way through the years is spirituality and religion are so different.
Yes.
And that is one of the things that our questions last evening led us to understand. Spirituality isn't coercive.
No, there's no coercion in spirituality.
But religion is.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is there's this pressure to conform to a belief system that isn't true in your heart because you know it is. It's true in your heart because you're afraid to question it.
Well, I always say that theology is man's attempt to make God predictable, and religion is our attempt to make God and people manageable. And but spirituality is I'm on a journey, and no, we are in Him. We live and move and have our being. God is so big and we're so small, but we want to explore and get to know this wonderful, amazing God as best as we can. And it is an adventure. And there's nothing else like it in the whole world.
And here's the beautiful thing. Not long after that original question, did God really say? that was posed from a place of darkness, God responded with the beautiful question, Adam, where are you?
Yes.
Not because he didn't know, but because he wanted Adam to know that he was still pursuing him.
Yeah. And he wanted Adam to ask himself that question.
And that is often what God will do.
Yeah.
But he says, Adam, where are you? Because we try to hide and we try to find certainty.
Yeah.
And if we just respond with humility
Yeah.
and honesty,
Yeah.
then we are on our way to
Yes.
finding answers that is going to lead us to the next question.
That's right. So that's really the wonderful thing about brave people asking good questions.
It does take courage and joy.
It does. And without those two things, courage and joy, people who I found who reject Torah and reject truth and reject some of the big truths of the scripture, they either lack the courage to change their minds, or they lack the joy to pursue the truth,
Well,
or they lack both of them.
We've been made to feel kind of guilty for asking certain questions.
I remember I've shared this story before too, but I remember as a little kid in Sunday school, I was probably 7 years old, I'm guessing, Mrs. Bush, and she was a saint of a woman, and she was just like a matriarch of the church, and she was our Sunday school teacher. And this little girl asked a question in Sunday school. I think the question was, if Satan repented, would God forgive him? And Mrs. Bush got angry. You don't ask those kinds of questions. And I thought, oh my goodness, questions are dangerous.
Well,
And I learned just keep my mouth shut. Don't ask questions.
yeah, but
Just believe what we tell you and don't color outside the lines.
they bubbled up inside, and great. I'm so grateful
Oh,
that
yes.
you didn't quit asking.
That's
Well,
right.
Aidan Steinsalz, he said that often enough, someone who considers himself wicked or even sinful is only an innocent who does not even know enough to ask the right questions.
Yeah. Just needs to ask the right questions.
So it's just an innocent person
Yeah. Yeah.
who is just trying to find their way.
Yeah. Well, I actually meant to start this discussion with this little story, but I think it's a good place to bring the discussion, start to wind it up. There's a great physicist, a Nobel Prize winning physicist, whose name was Isidore Rabi. And when he was a child, he said when he came home from school, his mother never asked him, "What did you learn in school today?" What she always asked him was, "Izzy, did you ask a good question today?" She understood the power of questions. And we never want to ruin a good question with just one simple answer. So we can check that box. I got the information I need. But with the good questions, the questions about God, a question about life, questions about the word, about righteousness, about wisdom, these are the questions we keep asking and asking, because they'll open more and more doors and lead us higher up and further in, as C.S. Lewis put it. And it'll lead us to the high country. And this is how we knock, and this is how God opens doors for us. But if we don't have the courage to knock and to go through the door wherever it may lead, well, then I guess you'll be depending on your theology for your eternal security. But I'd rather rely on God himself and hit our loving, great, wise, and good God. I just want to know him more than anything else. When Saul asked that question, when Rabbi Shaul the question, "Master, who are you?" or "Lord, who are you?" His whole life was about to change. A lot of the things he thought had to go into Sheol, had to go into the grave, he had to bury him and put him away. But the new things that were going to come. And his courage manifested itself by following hard after God and his Messiah. And the question is, are we willing to do that? So, Robin, do you have a final word for us?
Well, I think those big existential questions that people by nature eventually ask, if they're curious and wise enough to want to know, what is life about? why am I here? And is there a meaning to life?
Yeah.
And those are the questions that beg an answer, and God delights in a journey that begins with the first one.
Yeah.
And keep going.
Yeah. And I want to add just a little something on the end too. We spoke about wisdom. Chokhmah comes from the two words chok, power, and ma, what. But it's not the power of why. It's the power of what. And there are two questions I find that God rarely answers, if at all, for me. And the first question is, why did you do that? Why did you do that? Why did so-and-so have to die at such an early age? Why did this catastrophe have to happen?
Why are the wars happening?
Why? And if an answer is given at all, it's usually far down the road. So it's not the power of why. It's not the power of what if. C.S. Lewis makes it clear that God just never answers the question, what if? Because that's not reality. What is the reality? What is actually happening? That's the reality. And Chokhmah is the power of what? Asking the question of what do I do? What is this? What do you want me to learn? What's the direction you want me to go? But we don't ask why. And we don't ask what if.
But we can ask who.
Well, yes, we can ask him.
Who are you?
Yes, who are you? He loves revealing that answer.
And I think that's the basic beginning question.
Yes, it is. So, we're commanded to know God. We're never commanded to understand him because we can't understand him. But our understanding of him can grow. We can continue to understand him better and better. But to understand God, I'd have to be God. Or as the rabbi who sat next to me on the plane to Israel, if I could understand God, I would need a better God. But God is beyond our understanding. But he invites us and commands us to know him, to be one with him.
And to hunger and thirst for more.
Yes.
Always hunger and thirst for more.
Yes.
And hopefully these few breadcrumbs today will whet the appetite.
Yes.
And lead to more questions and answers, and then more questions.
So I guess this episode is more to raise questions
Absolutely.
than to give answers, huh?
Yes.
All right. Well, with that, we wish you shalom, and may God bless.
Shalom.
Thank you for joining us for today's teaching. If the work of Torah Today Ministries has touched your life, please consider making a donation or sponsoring an upcoming video. As a video sponsor, you'll have an exclusive opportunity to memorialize a family member, celebrate a special event, or simply support the ongoing creation of similar content. Your tax-deductible contribution helps ensure that our teachings continue to reach all who are longing for truth. Click the link or visit our website to learn more.